Police couldn't believe their eyes. A small bobcat was standing in the middle of a busy highway, not scared, not running away, but seemingly waiting for something. But as they got closer, they discovered an emergency tracking device attached to its leg. Why would a wild animal be carrying human equipment? Who was in danger? What started as a routine patrol quickly turned into a life-or-death mystery that shocked the entire country. When the truth was finally revealed, no one could believe what had actually happened. Keep watching until the end to uncover the unbelievable truth. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel and help us create even more high-quality videos. Fan 1. Police Patrol Officer Emily Carter squinted through the windshield as the scorching Arizona sun cast its golden rays over the blistering asphalt. Highway 64, a road she had patrolled hundreds of times, suddenly felt different that afternoon. Traffic had slowed down, with several cars pulling over to the side. Drivers stood outside their vehicles, pointing and talking amongst themselves, their voices carrying a mix of curiosity and confusion. Emily frowned as the radio crackled to life, reporting an unusual traffic disturbance. According to the information received, a wild animal had run onto the road, not fleeing, but seemingly trying to attract attention. This was unlike any call she had handled before. Her instincts immediately told her that something was off. Easing off the accelerator, she approached the scene. As she pulled over, she noticed a small crowd of drivers gathered near the shoulder. A man wearing an Arizona Cardinals t-shirt stepped forward, his face glistening with sweat, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Officer, you need to see this." "What's going on here, sir?" "There's a little bobcat that keeps running onto the road and then backing off, like it's trying to get people to notice. We thought it would just run away, but it's been doing this for nearly 20 minutes now." Emily's senses heightened. Bobcats were wild animals that typically avoided human contact, not sought it out. A young bobcat behaving this way could mean it was injured, orphaned, or, worse, there was something much bigger at play. "Has anyone tried approaching it?" "No, ma'am. It looks nervous, but it's not running away. It just keeps looking at us, then turning back toward the forest, like it's trying to show us something." Emily turned her gaze toward the direction the man pointed. Standing on the median, a small bobcat with a spotted coat stood perfectly still, its piercing eyes locked onto hers. Up close, she could see that it was leaner than a typical bobcat of its age. Its eyes didn't just reflect fear, they held something else entirely. It was as if it was desperately trying to communicate. Reaching for the binoculars strapped to her belt, she took a closer look. That's when she noticed something unusual. On its hind leg, a small metallic device glinted under the sunlight, a tracking device, but not the kind typically used by wildlife researchers. Emily immediately returned to her patrol car and contacted the Arizona Wildlife Protection Agency. If this animal had a tracking device, it could be part of a research program. But if it wasn't, then this story was about to take an unexpected turn. Within 20 minutes, a pickup truck with the logo of the Arizona Wildlife Protection Agency pulled up behind her squad car. A tall, wiry man stepped out, his sun-weathered skin and sharp eyes belonging to someone well acquainted with the wilderness. Dr. Mark Reynolds. "Thanks for getting here so fast." "Emily, good to be working with you. I hear we've got a strange case on our hands. I've never seen a bobcat act like this. It's not running from people. It's trying to get our attention. More importantly, it has some kind of device attached to its leg." Mark pulled a pair of binoculars from his jacket and focused on the animal. After a moment, he muttered something that made Emily's stomach tighten. "That's not one of our devices." "What do you mean our agency uses tracking collars, not leg attachments? And this doesn't look like anything I've seen in over 20 years in this field. It looks more like an emergency marker." "An emergency marker? Those are only issued to hikers and backpackers in certain national parks." Emily exchanged a glance with Mark, while the bobcat remained in place, staring at them, as if waiting for them to understand something. Why would a wild bobcat have human equipment who attached it? And more importantly, if this is a distress signal, where is the person who sent it? The bobcat suddenly let out a small sound, then turned and trotted toward the dense forest lining the highway. But after a few steps, it stopped, turning its head back toward them, as if urging them to follow. "No way." Mark shook his head, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Are we really saying this bobcat is leading us to someone in need? Emily didn't know the answer, but her gut told her that something significant was unfolding. She took a deep breath, checked the radio on her shoulder, and looked at Mark. I think we should follow it. If someone is out there in trouble, this might be our only chance to find them. Mark nodded in agreement. He turned back to his truck and grabbed a small bag containing a first aid kit and bottled water. If we're doing this, we better be prepared. Emily glanced at the bobcat still waiting at the forest's edge. Under the setting sun, its golden eyes gleamed with an unmistakable urgency. Bobcats typically avoided human contact, but this one was different. It knew exactly what it was doing, and now it was up to them to act. Emily adjusted her belt and took a deep breath as she stepped off the highway and into the wilderness. The transition was stark. The hot asphalt gave way to a dense forest where the air was noticeably cooler, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. The bobcat led the way, moving with a purpose that made it impossible to ignore. Every few steps, it would pause, look back, and let out a soft sound, as if ensuring they were still following. Mark walked beside Emily, his trained eyes scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. The deeper they ventured, the more apparent it became that this was not an ordinary trek. The forest was eerily quiet. There were no birds chirping, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. Emily felt her pulse quicken when she noticed footprints in the soft dirt. They were fresh, no more than a day old, and belonged to someone wearing hiking boots. A little farther ahead, they spotted something that made both of them stop. A torn piece of fabric, caught on a low-hanging branch, fluttered in the light breeze. Mark reached for it, turning it over in his hands. The material was thick and durable, the kind used for outdoor clothing. This wasn't just some random trail. Someone had come this way, and not long ago. Emily bent down and examined the ground near the torn fabric. That's when she saw it. A water bottle, half crushed, lying next to a small indentation in the dirt. There were scuff marks leading away from it, as if someone had fallen and then struggled to get back up. Next to it, partially hidden beneath a cluster of leaves, was something even more concerning. There were small droplets of blood. Mark exhaled sharply. Someone was hurt. The bobcat let out a more urgent sound now and darted forward. Emily and Mark exchanged a glance before quickening their pace, dodging low branches and stepping over exposed tree roots. The further they went, the more signs they saw. A backpack strap, snapped clean off, lay discarded near a cluster of rocks. Another few yards ahead, a deep impression in the ground indicated that someone had taken a hard fall. Emily's mind was racing. Whoever they were following had been struggling. Were they alone? Did they have supplies? How serious were their injuries? Then, as they cleared a small rise in the terrain, the forest opened up into a steep drop-off. Below them lay a ravine, about 30 feet deep, with jagged rocks and a narrow stream running through the bottom. And there, partially obscured by a fallen tree, was a human figure. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Mark, we found someone." The person was lying at an awkward angle, their leg pinned beneath a thick tree branch. Their clothes were torn, and even from this distance, Emily could see their face was pale. They weren't unconscious, but they were barely moving. Mark wasted no time. He pulled out his radio and called for emergency assistance, giving precise coordinates and requesting immediate medical evacuation. Emily, meanwhile, carefully navigated down the rocky incline, moving as quickly as she could without losing her footing. As she reached the injured man, he stirred, his lips parting slightly as he tried to speak. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "You found her." Emily frowned, glancing around. "Found who?" The man shifted, slightly wincing in pain, and raised a shaky hand. "The bobcat." Emily looked at the small creature, which had now positioned itself protectively near the fallen man's side. Its ears perked up, its eyes full of something that almost resembled relief. Mark reached them moments later and began assessing the man's condition. His leg was visibly swollen, likely fractured, and he was severely dehydrated. Emily handed him her canteen, and he took slow, measured sips. "What happened out here?" The man took a few deep breaths before answering. My name is David Langston. I was tracking her. Emily exchanged a look with Mark. You mean the Bobcat? David nodded weakly. She's part of my rehabilitation program. Mark's eyes widened in understanding. You're a wildlife rehabilitator. David nodded again, though the effort seemed to drain him. She was an orphan. I've been preparing her for release, making sure she can survive in the wild. She was doing well, but yesterday there was a storm. Lightning struck a tree near our camp. She panicked and ran. David paused, grimacing as a fresh wave of pain washed over him. I went after her, but the ground was slick. I lost my footing, and before I knew it, I was tumbling down here. Emily looked around at the steep incline and the rough terrain. It was a miracle he had survived the fall at all. I couldn't reach my emergency beacon. I knew I needed help, so I took my location marker and attached it to her harness. I hoped she'd go toward the road and someone would see her. Emily's gaze drifted back to the Bobcat, so she really did go looking for help. Mark exhaled in amazement. That's incredible. She made a conscious decision to find humans. David managed a weak smile. I wasn't sure if it would work. I just hoped. The Bobcat let out a soft sound and moved closer to David, nuzzling against his side. Even in his weakened state, he reached out and gently touched her fur. Emily felt something shift inside her. She had seen plenty of cases involving animals in distress. But this was different. This was an undeniable connection, something that defied the usual instincts of a wild creature. Mark finished stabilizing David's leg and radioed back to the emergency responders. They're about 45 minutes out. We should prepare to move him once they get here. David's eyes flickered toward Emily. Please, someone needs to look after her. Mark placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I'll take care of her until you're back on your feet. You have my word. David looked relieved. Thank you. Emily glanced at the Bobcat again. This little creature had done something extraordinary. She had defied expectations, crossed the invisible barrier between human and wild, and in doing so, had saved a life. As the rescue team arrived and prepared to extract David from the ravine, the Bobcat paced anxiously. Emily knelt beside her, lowering her voice to a gentle murmur. It's okay. He's going to be all right. And you did good. The Bobcat met her gaze with intelligent eyes, and for a moment, Emily could almost swear that the animal understood every word. As the rescue team carefully lifted David onto the stretcher and secured him for transport, the Bobcat remained close, its ears twitching with every movement. The once frantic energy in its body had lessened, replaced with an almost calm determination. Emily watched as the animal paced near the edge of the ravine, its golden eyes fixed on David, as if it understood what was happening. The paramedics stabilized David's leg with a splint before preparing to transport him up the incline. He was weak, but his grip on Emily's hand was surprisingly firm when he spoke again. Please do not let her go alone. She is not ready. Emily nodded, understanding the depth of his concern. Mark, standing beside her, spoke reassuringly. I will make sure she is safe, David. She will not be left behind. David's face softened with relief before he closed his eyes, exhaustion finally taking over. As the rescue team carefully maneuvered him up the ravine, the Bobcat let out a low, uneasy sound and attempted to follow. Emily, acting on instinct, crouched down and extended her hand slightly. It is okay, she said softly. He is going to be all right. The Bobcat hesitated, its sharp eyes scanning her face. Then, in a moment that took everyone by surprise, it stepped closer and gently pressed its head against Emily's outstretched hand before retreating. Mark let out a low whistle. I have worked with wildlife for over 20 years, and I have never seen anything like this. Emily stood up, shaking her head in amazement. There was something truly unique about this Bobcat. It was not just a wild animal, it was something more. 3 weeks later, Emily found herself driving through the gates of the Arizona Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The facility was a large expanse of land filled with enclosures designed to provide a safe environment for animals recovering before being reintroduced into the wild. As she parked and stepped out of her car, she spotted David sitting in a wheelchair outside one of the larger enclosures. His legs still wrapped in a cast, but his expression much brighter than the last time she had seen him. Officer Carter, he called out, a genuine smile on his face. Please, just call me Emily, she replied, shaking his hand. David laughed. That is right. I forgot you were not too formal back in the forest. Emily looked toward the enclosure, where the bobcat was perched on a rock ledge, watching them with alert eyes. It had grown in just a few weeks, its body leaner and more muscular, its movements as precise as ever. She looks good, Emily noted. David nodded. She is adjusting well, but there has been a new discussion about her future. Emily raised an eyebrow. Mark, who had walked up beside them, explained, normally, a rehabilitated bobcat would be released back into the wild as soon as possible, but given her intelligence, behavior, and the way she interacted with humans, some of us believe she might be better suited for a different role. Emily folded her arms. What kind of role? David smiled. A wildlife ambassador. Emily listened as he explained the concept. Some animals, due to their unique circumstances, cannot be fully released back into the wild. Instead, they become part of conservation programs, helping educate people about their species while living in safe, controlled environments. She has already made such an impact, David continued. Her story has spread across the country. People are learning about wildlife rehabilitation in ways they never had before. Mark added, there is even talk of using her image for an educational campaign on human and animal coexistence. Emily looked back at the bobcat, who seemed to be listening intently, its ears flicking in their direction. So she is not just any bobcat anymore, Emily mused. She is a symbol. David nodded. She is a reminder that nature is more complex than we often assume. Emily thought back to the moment when the bobcat had first stood in the middle of the road, stopping traffic, not running away but waiting for someone to notice. It had taken an extraordinary set of events, but the message had been clear. She turned back to David. Do you think she knew what she was doing that day? David exhaled, looking at the bobcat with something close to reverence. I think she knew she needed help, and she trusted that someone would come. Emily leaned against the railing, watching as the bobcat stretched and leapt onto a higher rock, moving with the effortless grace of a true predator. It is funny, she said after a moment. In all my years as an officer, I have seen humans ignore cries for help. And yet here we are, talking about a bobcat who went out of its way to make sure someone found the person who saved it. David smiled. Sometimes the ones we think are wild have more heart than we realize. Emily took a deep breath and turned to the camera crew that had gathered to document the bobcat's new role at the facility. She knew this story would continue to spread, inspiring people to think differently about wildlife, about responsibility, and about the unexpected connections that can form between humans and animals. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this incredible story? Do you believe animals have a deeper understanding of the world around them than we give them credit for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories just like this one.